The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending. Before we get started, we want to make sure that our audio is working okay. So if you can hear me, can you please raise your hand, and that lets me know that our audio is working. Great, thank you. And go ahead and lower your hands because we'll use that function to solicit stakeholder feedback here shortly. Welcome and thank you for attending the State Board of Addiction Counselor Examiner stakeholder meeting via webinar today. The date is December 14th, 2021, and the time is 11:01 a.m. Before we get started, we would like to introduce the staff members from the Division of Professions and Occupations that are present. My name is Darcy Magnuson, and I'm a regulatory analyst with the division. Also attending is Raina Sparborough-Gordon, Program Director, who should be here shortly, Dimitri Kunin, Senior Program Director, and Elena Kemp, Regulatory Coordinator. We will be facilitating this stakeholder meeting. Due to concerns surrounding the COVID-19 pandemic, the division has transitioned to a platform that is 100% virtual, and we appreciate your flexibility. As many of you have been to DORA stakeholder meetings before, we would like to reiterate the importance of your comments today. DORA makes decisions every day that may affect your life and your business, so your input is vital in the rulemaking process. Throughout this process, our goal is to create regulations that clarify and explain legislation, ensure minimum competency to enter and continue to practice, and provide only what is absolutely necessary for consumer protection without creating unnecessary barriers to the marketplace. Your input will be part of the information that goes to the board as the board considers adopting revisions to rules 1.9, 1.13, 1.19, and 1.20 to implement Colorado House Bill 21-1305 concerning the practice of mental health professionals and clarifying education and hours of practice required for licensure or certification as an addiction counselor and establishing supervision privileges for certified and licensed addiction counselors. This meeting is being recorded, and we will be posting it on the board's website by the close of business tomorrow. As the stakeholder meeting is held solely by webinar, please raise your hand by using the hand icon if you would like to speak, and we will unmute your line so you will be heard by everyone. Or you can type your comment in the question section and we will read it aloud. Before we start taking comments, we ask that anyone providing comments please state your name and who you represent. Feel free to provide either general comments on the rule changes or specific comments on the proposed language. Please limit your comments to no more than 3 to 5 minutes and try not to repeat something that was already said. Stating you're in full agreement with someone else works just fine and will be noted. If you are using audio through your computer, please remember to put any phones on vibrate or turn them off. And whether you are using computer or phone audio, try to keep background noises to a minimum when speaking. So before we start taking feedback, I'll just summarize briefly. Elena, if you can pull up the House bill, that'd be great. And go to the section about the rules. So while we get that pulled up, this legislation required the board to promulgate rules regarding continued competency. As many of you probably are aware, prior to 2020, when the Board of Addiction Counselor examiners went through sunset review, the continuing professional competency rules were housed within the Board of Addiction Counselors rules. And you can see on the screen right there, section 12-245-806. In this particular legislation, the legislature struck Office of Behavioral Health and added board in consultation with other stakeholders shall adopt rules establishing a continuing professional competency program that includes, and then the rest of that language wasn't changed, but is still in statute. So you're not seeing it in the bill, but if you went to 12-245-806, you would see all of the requirements. So what we have done, what's being proposed, and And Elena can pull back up the rules. So we went through all of the rules, and starting with the first proposed change. You can scroll back up, Elena, to the beginning. So in 1.19 and 1.13, those are just technical cleanup. So there was a cross-reference that was wrong and then a date that's no longer necessary. Again, in 1.13, same thing. And then in 1.19, the board took the rule that was in existence before the 2020 sunset, when that legislation was changed, and placed that language, that rule, back in as a proposed new rule adoption to comply with the new legislation from 2021. So hopefully, if you've been certified or licensed under this board, this language should look familiar to you because it was what existed in the past, and it's also consistent with the other mental health boards that require continuing competency, except for the psychologists. Their legislative mandate is a little bit different. But if you're duly licensed as a licensed professional counselor or a marriage and family therapist or a social worker, this language is consistent with those requirements. So with that being said, just to give you the background, and then the other proposed changes are technical, like you saw in those first two rules. So if you'd like to provide feedback, now is your opportunity to do that. And you can raise your hand and we can unmute your line, or you can type into the question function and we can read your question comments out loud. So we have a couple of raised hands. The first person I'm showing is Jennifer Hogue. Jennifer Hogue, you're self-muted. You unmute, we should be able to hear you. Jennifer Hogue. All right,
yes,
we should be able to hear you.
Yes, I'm sorry, I didn't have a question.
Okay. I'll place you back on mute and lower your hand. Katie Miller, I see that your hand is raised. We should be able to hear you. Katie Miller.
I don't have a question either. Sorry. That's weird.
No worries. Okay. Thank you.
At least not yet. I don't have a question.
Okay. Dr. Rio Leslie, you're self-muted. Dr. Leslie.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yes, good morning, everybody. And I do have a question. I remember reading, and you have to forgive me, so it won't take me 3 minutes, requirements for volunteer service being one of the professional development areas. But I also remember in the statute that certain types are excluded, that is serving on a state or municipal board, for example. So being an LPC, an LMFT, or an LAC, if I was appointed to a regulatory board again, I couldn't use that. So is there some need to clarify that in the rule, or is it clarified somewhere else sufficiently? Because I notice my students will read the rules before they'll read the statute. That's all.
So your question, Dr. Leslie, is, are there exclusions to voluntary service other than what's just the blanket statement in the rule, and does that need to be clarified based on what's in statute?
You said it better than I did.
I don't know about that. Okay.
Yeah.
Elena will add that as a comment there so that other stakeholders can see it, and we can also go over that with the board. What we'll also do before the February board meeting, when the board sees this again for its rulemaking hearing, is we'll add in the statutory language so it's clear.
Yeah.
If we can make that, Elena.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was getting at. So I could volunteer for a nonprofit, but from what I remember in the statute, and I could be wrong, volunteer time working for a governmental entity, even though that's what we do, would not count. So I think it would be helpful to clarify that, if I remember.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Leslie.
Thank you. I'm done.
All righty, I'm going to place you back on mute and lower your hand. Sherry Vader, you're self-muted. Looks like you lowered your hand. Galen Beaver, you're self-muted.
Yes, thank you. First of all, I did thank you, Dr. Leslie, for that question. I was wondering about that myself. But I did want to ask a question in relation to if we're going to trainings, will the, like specifically for like CAS credentialed people, are they going to be able to get their, like, can they get training certificates, CEUs, or whatever's, what is that looking like in terms of for those who are actually certified addiction specialists, getting their hours toward that in terms of training classes?
I'm not sure I understood that. So do you mind repeating that just to see if I can wrap my head around it so we can add it in as a comment in the relevant portion of the role?
Yeah, I think it was mainly just a question around how we get certificates or, you know, the type of things that would be recognized by this regulatory agency as, you know, training. Will it be, does it have to come from a certain source? Does it have to be, you know, I guess that's all I'm trying to figure out is what's going to be acceptable to the board in terms of proving that I did, let's say, professional development.
I see. So documentation.
Yeah.
Okay. There is a section, there should be a section in here about documentation and the audit. Can you scroll up a little bit, Elena?
My biggest question was, you know, if I do get a chance to do, let's say, a Zoom training or I go to an in-person training, what kind of document do I need to have so that if I am audited, you know, it's going to be good?
Right. Okay. Will you add that in, Elena? Trying to think of the best place to add it as a comment. So the question is, what type of documentation is required by the board? Okay, thank you. I'm going to place you back on mute and lower your hand. Sherry Vader. We should be able to hear you.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't have a question on there. I'm sorry.
No problem. I will place you back on mute and lower your hand. Jasmine Aranda, I see you asked how to raise your hand, but I don't see your hand is raised. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. If you would like to speak, you're unmuted on our end. Self-muted on your end. Jasmine Aranda.
I figured it out. I'm good. I don't have a question.
Okay, great. And then Katie Miller, I show your hand is raised again. I've unmuted you.
I'm not sure why that's happening because I'm not touching it. So
Okay.
That's pretty weird.
It could be sometimes if we lower your hand and we're doing things at the same time, sometimes that triggers it.
Okay, okay. Thank you.
Thanks. Any other questions, comments, feedback? Charles Davis, I see your hand is raised. Charles Davis, you're self-muted.
You hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, more of a comment than a question, but the item where they're requiring bachelor's degrees for the CAS moving forward, I just wanted the board to know that that's having serious detrimental impact on our services and workforce here in Southern Colorado. We unfortunately don't have a very high college attainment here, and so it's really crippling our ability to hire folks. So I just wanted to make folks aware.
This is Elena. I just wanted to make sure that I'm adding that comment. This is for Mr. Davis in the correct section of the rules. Do you know what subsection of the rules that was mentioned?
For the bachelor's, it's not part of this rulemaking.
Okay.
It's part of licensure,
Okay.
not continuing competency.
Thank you.
We have a written comment from Oksana Sanchez. Currently in the rule, there are no education requirements for a LAC. The wording is that the board may require additional training. Prior to the changes, there was a limited number of classes, and now the changes, there looks like there is more education requirements. Can you clarify this? I'm not sure that I understand exactly what you're saying. If you want to raise your hand and we can get a better understanding. We also received a written comment from David Collins. I'm going to have to agree with that comment. Sarah Stange, sorry for mispronouncing your name, very much agrees. CAS requirements make it harder to employ people in rural Colorado. Lisa Pizziota, your hand is raised and you're self-muted.
Hello, I have a question. I may be a little behind the game, but I had a CAC 3, and I am wondering at this point, I did not move forward with taking the exam. I'm not sure what the exam was called, but I didn't do that as of yet. And I'm wondering, do I still have that opportunity to become certified by taking that test?
So my suggestion, if you have individual questions, would be this particular rulemaking is just about continued competency. But if you have specific questions about your certification or license, you're welcome to reach out to the mental health boards, and I can give you that email address in case you want to email them.
Will you put that in the chat? I've actually done that several times with no response, so thank you.
Okay, yeah, I will drop that in the chat. And then you're always welcome to reach out to the rulemaking inbox as well, and we can forward messages to you. So,
perfect. Thank you.
So I will drop the email address in the chat right now, and that's for the Dora Mental Health Boards.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Another written comment from Mary Ann Avery. I agree the CAS requirements are helpful, but still pose challenges for developing new counselors in the rural areas. Oksana Sanchez, also the prior to changes, there was deemed status. In the middle of this, I changed employment and have no way to register with Dora, nor was I made aware of the need for LAC candidacy, so never adopted. Will my hours be counted? Again, if you have individual questions, please reach out to the mental health boards. And then also, thank you, Mary McMahon from CDHS is participating, who sent me a message and said that the question on the LAC education requirements for trainings is part of the OBH rulemaking process. So thank you, Mary, for that. As many of you are aware, OBH and Dora have different responsibilities. So if you have specific questions about the LAC education requirements, it would be best to engage with the Office of Behavioral Health in their rulemaking. Thea Wessel, you're self-muted. We should be able to hear you.
Can you hear me, Darcy?
Yes.
Perfect. So I realize that you just directed us back to OBH, but what we're referencing, or what the question was, that what Atsana had asked, is actually in 1305 under 12-245 804 1.5. And it clearly states that there isn't an education requirement currently, but that the board may waive education requirement. And so it's come to my attention that this is not being applied consistently. I know of a couple of people who've gotten around this and a couple of people who haven't. And so I'm asking for clarification according to the House bill to guide those going through this process right now about what are we doing until March of 2022 to talk about what is required currently. Because if you look at 12-245 804 1.5, that it's stated according to the bill.
I don't know that we have that. It wasn't what we had showing. I don't know if you have that open, Elena.
Right there. The board may waive any education requirements in subsection 1E of the section until the Department of Human Services establishes the education requirements for licensure according to 2780-108. And if you follow that, it references 1.5, so it becomes this never-ending spiraling tale of not clear.
Okay. And so with those questions, those are outside of this rulemaking. I understand it sounds like it's an issue. My suggestion is to contact the board. Raina, the program director for the board, is also on this meeting, so she's hearing these comments, and the board will hear them as well.
Do we have input then now to talk about those requirements in the coursework, or just really about the changes to continuing education?
Correct. This particular stakeholder meeting and this rulemaking project is solely limited to continuing professional competency.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and then the coursework is through the Office of Behavioral Health. So, all right. I'm going to go ahead and place you back on mute and lower your hand. More comments, I will read them. I'm not sure that they are relevant to this particular rulemaking, but I'll go ahead and read them. Michael Rettenberg, CAS rules are an issue for hiring across the state. Sean Theodorados, what is considered appropriate training for the CAT requirements to facilitate psychoeducation and therapy groups? Candace Eves, could you please review the deemed status process and how that covers those of us who have various licensures in the state? So here's the proposed language for the deemed status. I'm not sure, we can add in your question into the rule so that the board can see it and discuss it at the rulemaking hearing. And then I'll wait till Elena, once you've had a chance to add that question in there before we go on to the next question. We have Let me make sure. Okay, we have another question. Elena, it's in Rule 1.19 F1D, once you're done there. Regarding supervision, and the question's from Kevin Robinson. Does supervision mean receiving supervision or providing supervision? My understanding is that it's providing supervision, not receiving supervision, but we will put that question in there for the board to clarify. Oksana Sanchez, I'm sorry, I'm confused if we are being directed back to OBH, but the rules are being dictated by the Department of Human Services. Where can we get contact information? So the Office of Behavioral Health is housed within the Department of Human Services. Thank you, Mary. And Mary McMahon, as I mentioned, who works for the Office of Behavioral Health, is participating today on the webinar. And she did say that I could share her contact information. So I will go ahead and drop her email address into the chat so that you have that if you would like to contact Mary with your specific questions about what the Office of Behavioral Health is working on. Kayla, you might go back to that same rule, Elena. Kayla Hokinson Rios, can we specify how many hours of providing supervision would be needed to receive 1 hour of CEU? Okay, we're just monitoring to see if we have any other comments or anyone who has a hand raised. I'm not seeing any. But we'll pause for a little bit just to make sure we get a chance to hear from anyone participating who would like to weigh in on the proposed changes. While we wait a little bit longer, we'll go ahead and talk about next steps. So currently, as you saw in the legislation, the board's required to make the rules on or before March 1st, 2022. The rulemaking hearing is tentatively scheduled for February 8th, 2022 at the board's next regularly scheduled meeting. At that rulemaking hearing, stakeholders will have a final opportunity to testify regarding the proposed changes before the board begins its deliberation regarding the proposed changes. The board did see these proposed rules at its last meeting this month, and then wanted to get stakeholder feedback. So between now and the February 8th meeting, you're welcome to provide written comments to the rulemaking inbox. That's included on all of the notices that we send out. We also post everything on the board's website under the public notices tab. We post it on the board's calendar when there's a stakeholder meeting or rulemaking hearing. And then we send an email blast to all certificate holders and licensees and other interested stakeholders to notify people of stakeholder meetings and rulemaking hearings. So you will have additional time to weigh in if you'd like to before that February 8th date. So we encourage that. And then all of this information will be provided to the board in advance of that February 8th rulemaking hearing. We have another comment from Thea Wessel. An E2 would suggest providing supervision would not count for hours. Nope, you just skip past it. It's a little bit lower. I think it's supposed to be F2. If I'm not mistaken. Yes. Okay, so it's under, scroll back up a little bit. The part you've already been, we've had some comments on the supervision piece. There we go. So the suggestion is that you would not receive credit or continued competency for providing supervision. Okay, so we'll do a last call and then wrap up at 11:50, or sorry, not 11, do you have 11:35? We haven't received any other written comments, and if no one else would like to speak. We have a question from Chad Shakely. How do you ensure deemed status meets requirements? Alrighty, I'm not seeing any other comments, so we will go ahead and wrap up. Thank you again for participating in today's meeting. As part of this collaborative process, all written comments and oral comments will be provided to the board for review and consideration before the permanent rulemaking hearing, which is tentatively scheduled for February 8th, 2022. That concludes this stakeholder meeting, and we thank you again for your participation.
Okay, we're going to end the webinar now. Thank you.